All right, Chicago, hello, welcome. We will give it a couple more. And all right, folks trickling in, DC, Arizona. Love it. I'm in Boston, by the way. And I'm getting ready for my personal favorite holiday, which is St. Patrick's. It's coming this week.
I wasn't going to comment on the green, but
oh yeah, all the different shades of green. This basically the whole month of March is kind of how I energize that. Brilliant. All right, so folks are going to continue to trickle in. What I'm going to go ahead and do, so I'm going to switch out the waiting room so that folks can just join as we go. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to kick off and start with our content. So just before I do that, some housekeeping rules. Everyone is muted. So please feel free to use the chat functionality, ask any questions throughout. We will have time at the end to go through them. But if any of those questions are relevant or pertinent to what Michael is sharing, I will kind of interrupt where is appropriate and make sure that we get those questions asked. So I am going to go ahead and awesome. Okay. So welcome everyone. I'm really, really excited to kick off today's session with Michael, and he is going to take us through the Cybersecurity 101 to start us off and just ground us in why we are here today, why NationBuilder is hosting this. I think most of you in the room know what NationBuilder is and what NationBuilder does, but for those of you who don't, we are a software company. NationBuilder builds software that builds movements. And so to do that, we have 4 core components to our platform. We have a dynamic CRM. So that's your database. That's where you're able to get an understanding of who your voters are, who are the people who are donating to your campaign, your volunteers. We then have a communication suite. This is where you're able to send out communications, whether that be in the form of texting or emailing or social media, but you have a full communication suite that is integrated with your dynamic CRM. Moving into your CMS. So this is your content management system. You have the ability within your nation to create multiple websites for your campaign or for different initiatives that you have running. And last but definitely not least in the political landscape is our fundraising suite. This is where you have the ability to not only receive incoming payments, but completely track your entire fundraising infrastructure from pledging to fundraisers and so on. But to do all of this work, we ground in our product principles, and there are 4 of them. The first is own your own data, which I think is extremely relevant to what Michael's going to take us through today. And the whole premise with NationBuilder's construct of own your own data is that your data is yours. We do not do anything with your data set. It is yours. At any time, you can leave with it. Your data is safe. You can access it, you can build into it, and you can take it with you. We also ground ourselves in the construct of putting people at the center. And so when we think about this, this is really about being able to find your people, personalizing your outreach to them, and then ultimately identifying the leaders within your community to do the work that you need to do to get elected. Moving nicely into moving people to action. So the premise here is really kind of like, don't just build a list, build a movement, right? No one cares that you have 150,000 people on your database if you only have 10,000 opening. Right, keep those folks engaged and actually move them to action. And last but definitely not least is the ability to distribute leadership. And so I know Michael's going to talk about this later today and as it pertains to who has access to your data, but it's really important to think about what does the distribution of leadership look like when you're running a digital campaign. The last piece I want to touch on today is advanced privacy before I hand it over to Michael. And so there's some key concepts to think about within NationBuilder when you are thinking about privacy and setting yourself up for success in the security realm. The first is consent. And so within NationBuilder's platform, you have the ability to create multiple and granular constructs of consent. What I mean by that is giving people the ability to opt in to emails, to texting, to cookie consent. And all of that is done within our database, right? So that dynamic CRM that we talked about. And that's going to give you the ability to have a really strong and granular understanding of the relationship that you have with each individual. Up next is permissions. And so this really is the ability to understand who has access to what when it comes to your campaign. Thinking through how can I make it more granular? What access points do I want people to have? who has access to import data or export data, who has the ability to send an email communications or to draft website pages. These are really important decisions that you need to be thinking about as you're setting up your campaign so that you have the best foot forward when it comes to cybersecurity. Up next is the analytics consent banner. This is important if you are trying to gather consent for folks who are engaging in your front-facing website using your CMS. And so you have the ability to create a cookie consent where you can set it back to your analytics tools, whether you're using Chartbeat or Google Analytics or whatever it is. But it gives you the ability to actually gain that consent. So allowing people to accept the cookies on your website that you may be using for paid media, for any type of engagement like that. And it's a really important thing to show that you are a campaign that is, privacy first. And the last piece in this is a construct around data download and a digital will. This is very specifically as it pertains to regulations within GDPR and CCPA. And we're not here today to get into the weeds of regulation, but this is just a thing to note. If that is something that your campaign is speaking about, that you have interest in actually providing the ability for someone to have a data download or digital will, that exists. So a data download is kind of exactly what it sounds like. An individual, a constituent, a voter can come and request of your campaign all of the data that you hold on that individual, and you have the access to give them a complete picture of all of the data you have gathered on them. And a digital will gives the end user, so Sorcha here, it has the ability to say, this is the information that I want to provide if a catastrophic event happens to me and you have my data, right? So it's a digital will. So with all of that said, I am going to hand the reins over to Michael, the president and CEO of Defending Digital Campaigns, who is our fantastic guest speaker today that's going to take us through all things cybersecurity. So with that said, Michael, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. We are really thrilled to be here today. And let me just say something about privacy for 1 second. You cannot have privacy without security. They are deep. And I used to do my last job, I was executive director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance. One of our big programs was Data Privacy Day. And that was because privacy and security are so intertwined in this world, right? And I love the fact that people own their own data, because that really is the way it has to be, right? So kudos to all of you for that. So yeah, so let's jump in. So we always have to start when we talk about cybersecurity about who's out there trying to do harm to us, right? Who are the bad actors? Well, there are cyber criminals who would love to steal your data because they want to monetize it, right? They want to steal people's identities. They want to monetize in other ways, get into your bank account, right? So we have cyber criminals. They're pretty rampant out there on the web. Now, nation states are something we have to be concerned about in this particular space because they're looking to disrupt our democracy. And so that's their goal. Excuse me, sorry. Get a little, right in the beginning here, got a little stuff in my throat here. They're trying to disrupt in some way, our democracy. And then in this space, we have hacktivists, right? We have people who want to disrupt to further their own social or political ends. They don't want your candidate to prevail. They don't want your policy to prevail. They don't like what somebody did. And so hacktivists are very much a part of this world that you need to be aware of. So we can't talk also about cybersecurity without talking a little bit about risks. And really what I think the big problem sometimes for folks like you all on this call are in cybersecurity is that you're bombarded by all the possible things that could happen in cybersecurity, right? But cybersecurity is about risk management. So cybersecurity is about trying to focus on the things that actually might happen to you, not all the possible things that could happen, right? When we think about this sector and we think about the political sector, both organizations and campaigns, we think a lot about attempting to access accounts, stealing credentials, trying to get in to your email or your Google Workspace account or your documents and those kinds of things. That is what people want. There's a lot of harm they can do once they're in there, like sending emails out under your name to phish other campaigns or your own employees, those kinds of things. And so that is one of the things that we're most concerned about. We're also concerned about websites. Websites can be defaced, they can be taken down. We'll talk about this a little bit later. Of course, we're all generally susceptible to phishing attempts, whether they're directly political related or not, right? Attempts to steal personal information and gain credentials. And then mistakes. If you're in an organization, mistakes can be made. right? Somebody could forward something with personal information that wasn't supposed to be forwarded. They click on something they're not supposed to. So, not everything's nefarious. Not everything's, somebody coming from the outside. Sometimes cybersecurity, this is true if you look at like the Verizon data breach report, you'll see that, mistakes happen, right? And so this is part of cybersecurity that often doesn't get addressed with the gloom and doom and the fear and the uncertainty and doubt that some people in cybersecurity would like to, make people, scare them. I'm not a fear person. So today, really, we're just going to talk about some of the basics, and we'll go through these. But these are what we consider, the general basics for any organization or any campaign. Obviously, you want to protect accounts. You want to do that through authentication and passwords. You want to protect your website. You want to use encrypted communications in certain kinds of ways. You want to think about shared accounts, which is something in this space which may be different than some other spaces. You want to be ready if something happens, and you want to create a culture of cybersecurity in your campaign or organization. And we'll talk about all these in a little depth. So really it starts, as I said, the main thing I'm concerned about is protecting accounts. So that is because accounts are the keys to the kingdom, right? If I have your email and I have your login and I can get into your account, I own you, right? And just think about the kinds of things I talked about, phishing emails, but also if I need to if I want to get into your other accounts, then I just like, oops, I forgot my password, and that becomes a password reset. So really, even more than your financial accounts in some ways, your cloud accounts, your email accounts are your most valuable accounts. So when we think about this, like we're going to talk about a lot of things, but the one takeaway is if you're only going to do one thing, if you're just like, I can only do one thing in cybersecurity, that's it. That's my limit, right? We're going to tell you, implement the strongest authentication and security on your highest risk accounts, which are some of the ones I mentioned. So what does that mean? What is strong authentication? Well, you've heard it, 2FA, MFA, two-step verification. These are all forms of strong authentication. I like strong authentication better because it's more of an umbrella across what we're trying to do. And all authentication is legitimizing account access at login. It's like proving, not necessarily that I'm Michael, actually, because that's identity. That's different than authentication. It's just proving that the person who's attempting to access this account legitimately has access to this account. And obviously it makes a lot of sense that you'd want that to be as strong as possible. So when we think about strong authentication, this is the strongest that you can get, right? Which is a strong password, right? A security key, which if you don't know, a security key is a piece of hardware that plugs into your USB device, or if it's NFC, like this little one has a little thing on the back, you can touch it to your phone, right? That a password plus a key plus using something like Google's Advanced Protection Program or Microsoft's highest form of authentication is not only the easiest and best way to protect your accounts, but using those almost virtually a lot of, and I don't hear this a lot in security, people will say that makes your account bulletproof, right? That it's unphishable. And so this is why we think it's so important and why it's the one thing you do if you don't do anything else, because that's what you want to protect. Cybersecurity is about protecting out from the most important assets, right? So these accounts are your crown jewels. We like to call them the crown jewels, right? That's how you do. If I was doing a big enterprise cybersecurity, we'd have a whole exercise by identifying what are your most important assets, and then you protect out from there. And that's why this is so important in this space. Oops, not coming through too quickly here, but got a little weird. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so I talked about the security key. Here's a bigger, they come from different folks. They're FIDO compliant. FIDO is a standards body that sets standards around the way that authentication can happen. And so these keys are not single use. They are multiple use across the internet. So a FIDO compliant key that you get from either Yubico or Google or somebody else can be used obviously on Google, they can be used on Microsoft, they can be used in Dropbox, they can be used like on hundreds of sites. They can be used on Twitter, they can be used on Facebook. So these are really important, and like I said, they're multiple use across a lot of different things. However, passwords still exist. And, you know, the whole concept of passwords and security was not the original idea behind passwords. That's not the people who started putting logins and passwords. They weren't thinking about it from a security perspective. You know, I don't have a ton to say about passwords except this. You know whether your passwords are any good or not. I'm not going to sit here and tell you how to do a 15-character random password and how to create that in memory, memorize that. Passwords are antithetical to the human experience. We are not good at remembering long strings of random things. We're not. Some people, if you have a photographic memory, good for you. You can do that. I cannot. Therefore, I must use a password manager, right? A password manager will create these long passwords for you. They will store them for you, and you never have to remember them. The good news is that right now, if you're on Edge or you're on Chrome or you're on Firefox, Safari, there is a built-in password manager in your browser. The next time you log into a site, look up in the URL bar. If you see a little key, that is a password manager. If you click on that, it will start to remember your passwords. They all offer ways to manage those passwords, and there's some other fancy stuff in there, like they can tell you whether your passwords have been lost in the dark web. There's a lot of little things built into these browser passwords. You can start using that right now, you know, today after this call. There are other password services like LastPass and 1Password. They're all great. They do different things, but you have one now without paying any money. It's there for you to use, and I highly encourage you to do it. So protecting your website, you know, your website is your public facing presence, right? And if you're a campaign or you're an organization, I mean, this is where you'd want to drive a lot of traffic, right? You know, this is where your candidate has their bio that tells why, you know, they're the right person for the job. There may be lots of important information there, like leading into, you know, election day around when the polls are open, or, you know, if someone can request a ride from your campaign to actually get to the polls, right? It's where you might engage people around fundraising. It's where your policy statements are. It's a really important, and although most, you know, in my experience, most campaign websites are not that complicated, another meaning they don't have a ton of pages on them, right? They're pretty, you know, they're pretty lean and mean, and that's great. They still are really important. And so they can be susceptible. And, you know, websites can be, I don't know, you know, created often by people outside your campaign, right? So, you know, very few people are creating their own websites these days, right? I mean, that's just, you know, that's we've moved on from that. So you want to make sure that it's protected, right? So what we are concerned about are things like defacements, right? And this actually happened to the Trump campaign. They were defaced. It was very short, but there was a defacement during that last election cycle. So they could put up something embarrassing about you. They could, you know, put up something that's untrue about you. They could change the content on your website if they get in there, right? They could maybe say that the polls are closing, you know, 2 hours earlier than they're closing, right? Or something like that, or change the address of where people go to vote, or you know, change your policy statement to be some policy that like your candidate would never ever support, right? And then be like, look at this candidate supporting, you know. So, and then there are DDoS attacks, or distributed denial of service. This is when basically people flood the zone, right? So the bad actors come in and they make so many requests on your website at a time that no one, it just basically brings it down. And so you want to protect against those things. The good news is here, there are some protections that are out there. So Cloudflare is a security company, but they're known mostly, you know, at least initially, for their website protection. They have a freemium product for anyone out there. You can register your website with them and they will protect you against DDoS attacks. If you're DDC eligible, we'll talk about this a little bit at the end, we have an enhanced free Cloudflare for campaigns, which provides some additional security. You know, I don't know, you know, the hosting situation is something you always want to be aware of. You know, usually your web developer might pick your host. I don't know, with NationBuilder, do you host websites? I'm not sure how you all do that, but you know, yeah, I mean, so that's good, right? Because a good web host will do the things that need to be done behind the scenes for you, which includes updating things, right? Like, you know, even if you're using open source stuff or whatever, that stuff still needs to be updated, right? I mean, you know, in my last job, we had a web developer. I think we're using Joomla or something like that, and there was a thing that needed to be updated, but he didn't update it because he didn't like what the update did. It restricted the way he got into the website. Well, guess what? The bad guys knew about that. And, eventually our website got hacked because he hadn't patched it, right? So that's what you want your web host to do for you. Like, take that headache away from you, make sure that all those, maintenance is taken care of and those kinds of things. And also good web hosts also monitoring these other things like the flow of traffic into your website and whether it's being overwhelmed. And, they can let you know, whoa, there's something going on here. So that's really important. And then, talk to your developer if you're not using something, central like NationBuilder about what they're doing about security and what hosts they're using. A lot of times web developers, they just have their favorite, like, I like this web host and they use it. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the best for you, it's just the one that they're most comfortable with. And they're taking care of that for you. So you're not even asking the question because they're like, I built your website, I hosted for you, right? So, and that's part of a service that they provide. So websites are important and most people don't pay attention to the security around them.
Yeah, that's really important, Michael. And just for anyone who is a NationBuilder customer on today's call, we do provide everything that Michael talked about, especially as it pertains to any DDoS attacks. And so please know you're in very good hands as it pertains to protecting your website from a hosting perspective.
Yeah, and that's right. I mean, that's one of the things that, can, give you a little peace of mind in some of the security areas, because most of people are not website experts anymore, right? I mean, it used to be we all had in-house web developers, right? And, the webmaster, right? Well, that's a, kind of a, I don't know if anybody even has one anymore. Actually, now that I say that, I'm thinking, when's the last time I heard, email our webmaster? Maybe I'm dating myself. So encrypted communications, again, in the organization and campaign space, in the way that we work in this space, there's a lot of sensitive information that gets shared. There's a lot of information that you do not want out in the public. And there's a lot of sensitive information that gets shared. So encrypted communications is really a simple way of just keeping sensitive information private. What encryption does, many of you may know this, but here's your basic 101, it scrambles, right? It scrambles the information. It takes your message, scrambles it so no one can read it when it leaves, no one can read it when it gets to the other side except the person who is expected to receive it. You are likely using some form of encrypted communications right now. You might be using Wicker, you might be using Signal, you might be using WhatsApp, right? You're probably using some form of encrypted communications. The key here in the campaign and organizational space, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is to make sure people understand when they're supposed to use encrypted communications and what they're supposed to send via encrypted communications and other things, right? Like, what kind of information do you not want hanging around in people's email box because it could be mistakenly forwarded, or if they were to get breached, then it would be there and could be taken, right? So you need to be thinking about that from an organizational perspective, because most people are actually using some form of this right now. So shared accounts, this is an interesting area, right? So I come from, I was the executive director of the National Cybersecurity Alliance for a decade. They do, when I was there, they still do. National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, a lot of public education and awareness around cybersecurity. One of the messages that we had always was never share your password with anybody else, right? Well, over time, frankly, I hated all the password messaging and dumped almost all of it. But that was one of the ones that was really, again, one of these pieces of cybersecurity advice, which you tell people not to do it, but in reality, they can't follow it, right? In your home, you may share a password with a, partner, spouse, or your kids for certain kinds of accounts, right? And that's natural, and you want to do it. And in the campaign and organization space, you do it as well, right? Probably most of you have an info account, right? An info email that might be monitored by several people. You are certainly using some kind of shared environment on social, either Facebook or Twitter, where multiple people are accessing these accounts, right? So they are a natural thing in this space. So you want to make sure that they're, again, highly protected. So for example, on Facebook, I might be I'm more than likely using my personal account. If you make me administrator, you're making my personal account the administrator of your Facebook page, right? So you want to make sure that there's strong authentication on those accounts, like a key. You're going to hear me say that again, definitely good password practices, right? You want to manage privileges. This is what we're talking about in the beginning, right? Like you want to be able to make sure that people are only allowed to do what they need to do, right? You don't want to give them more privileges. You don't want them access to the finance system unless they need the finance system, right? And if they're access to the finance system, do they need all of it, or they just need to be, submit bills to accounts payable, right? I mean, what is it that they need to do? And this isn't just to restrict people because you don't want them messing around. This is for security, so that if their account was compromised and someone tried to get into the finance system, they would be blocked from doing anything except what that person was allowed to do. So you want to manage those privileges. You can do it on Facebook. There are different privileges on Facebook. You can be an administrator, you can post, you can be an ad buyer. You can do these things, and make sure that people only have access to what they need. You need to manage your users as well. So especially in the campaign environment, and to a certain extent organizations, people come and go, right? These are, dynamic environments, people volunteer extensively for 2 weeks and then they leave, right? Staff come and go, or staff get added, right? So you need to, when someone leaves the organization, make sure that you're managing that, like take them off the Facebook account, do something with their email, either, delete that account or forward those emails to someone else, or, transfer their files to someone else when they leave and close the account, right? You have to manage these users because the bad actors will look for those kinds of accounts, right? If there's an account that's semi-dormant or dormant and they can get in it, then you may not know they're in there at all because you wouldn't even see anything. So managing users is really important. And then on shared accounts, just find alternative ways of doing the work without actually sharing the account. So for example, back to that info email. Do people really need access to the inbox, or do they just need the emails themselves and respond? So can you forward them, right? So, Jane, Jack, and Jill all, monitor the info email account, but they just get the emails forwarded to them and then they respond from their own email box. Therefore, you can have extremely strong credentialing on top of that email box without worrying about, Jane forgot the, password. Now I have to give it to her. Maybe we should change it, those kinds of things, right? And those if you need to do that, you can do that, of course, and the keys can be registered to those accounts. Accounts can have keys for multiple users registered to accounts. So you can do that as well. So just think about, ways of, again, this is all about reducing kind of the surface, right? That could be attacked when you do things like that.
Michael, I think you may have actually just answered Melanie's question, but she had said, would a shared account have multiple physical security keys that you give to each user of the account?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. So the key is sort of registered, you can register as many keys as you want to almost any account, right? So as long as I have the credentials to get in, right, like the username and the password initially, I can register a key that is to that account. The other way to do it is for the keys to be registered centrally and then given, to people. So I've registered a key to the shared email account and here's your key. And now it's registered to that account, so it's good to go. And then, you can use it for any of the other accounts, right? As well. So cyber incidents. Cybersecurity, this is one of my universal truths about cybersecurity. I'm going to take a quick sip of this because I'm getting a little tickle here. Cybersecurity is about resistance. Obviously, I've been talking about stopping bad things from happening, right? And that's, you want to have that big brick wall. You want the fewest things to happen as possible. But the reality is that cybersecurity is equally about resilience. It's equally about making sure that if something does go wrong, that you bounce back as quickly as possible. And that often gets overlooked in discussions of cybersecurity because it's usually about prevent the bad thing from happening, right? Well, we all want to prevent car accidents, but they do happen, right? So, you want to make sure that whatever, from your car accident, hopefully no one gets hurt, but, your car gets to the body shop as soon as possible to get your car back, right? Like, we just want to be, maintain the way we work. So resilience starts with preparation. And the worst time to think about an incident is when one happens, because by then it's too late. you don't want to be thinking like, what do we do now that we just lost all our data, right? Or that we have ransomware and we can no longer operate our system. So you should have a response team, right, in place. Look, again, I'll back up a couple of steps. Trying to scope cybersecurity for this environment means changing the rules a lot from the way, like if you were to talk to like the federal government or to, CrowdStrike or one of these big gigantic enterprise level cybersecurity, like if you're a utility, you're going to have all kinds of cyber incident planning. You're going to have, my God, reams of stuff. You're going to be doing tabletop exercises and all this stuff around, hopefully, around a cyber incident. Here, you have to shrink it down, right? And you have to have your cybersecurity, this is a good example of this, has to be managed within the framework of what you're capable of, right? You can't have security beyond what you're capable of managing. So you're not going to have a gigantic incident response plan, but you've got to have some forethought here. So you need a leadership team. You need to identify the people that would come together in a cyber incident. Obviously, if it's an organization, you're going to have, I don't know if you need your executive director or COO, you're going to need you're going to need comms, because there's likely going to be a public facing presence to this. And you're going to want to make sure you own that messaging and make sure it's good. You're going to need IT or cybersecurity support for sure. Perhaps you're, depending the level of compromise of the systems, and you're going to need legal help. And we'll talk about that a little bit, because in a second. You want to focus, just as you would in any crisis, on continuity of operations, right? How would we operate if our most valuable system wasn't available tomorrow? That's the question, right? Like, is there a way to move from a tech-based system to a paper-based system if we had to, right? So that we could keep doing what we want to do. What is your backup plan for, think of it as if it was a hurricane, right? Maybe some of you are in Florida, right? And so, you probably think about that a lot. What happens if a hurricane came through, in August and your office was closed and flooded, right? And now, how would you maintain operations? It's the same thing here. It's just that it's cyber. It's not different. It's not scary. It's just like continuity of operations, right? That's the goal, especially in a campaign, especially as you get closer to election day, right? Like, what would happen if you had an incident 2 days before election day and your core systems were down, right? You want to make sure that you are ready to continue rocking and rolling all the way up to election day, right? You need to have immediate access to your legal requirements. And this is complicated. Welcome to America, where every state or most states have their own laws, right? You need to be aware of not only the state you operate in, but if you have donors, for example, and you were to lose their data for some reason, you may have to act in the requirements to the state that they live in. So you're going to need legal help here. There are all kinds of things that differ in incident response, and part of it's going to be keyed off by what data is lost and how much is lost. And so it could be by the number of records, it could be the type of information that's in their records, their name, their home address, whatever. There are different requirements. This is why you need lawyers to help you. And you may have different requirements yourself around what you have to do around notifying people whose data is lost, right? Perhaps even providing, credit monitoring, depending on what state you're in. So you want to kind of have a sense of that beforehand. I used to work with a lot with a lawyer who worked for for a super big law firm that worked on incident response in cyber. And he was like, yeah, well, we have clients that if they had a data breach, they would need to send out 5 million letters. Well, it's not that easy to get 5 million pieces of paper on the drop of a hat, right? Or 5 million envelopes, right? So, not that I'm asking you to, think that way, but just that's the kind of thing that you have to be prepared for, right? Your vendors, and in this space, by the other way, the other thing on the legal requirements, depending on your state, you may be required to report it to someone in the state, perhaps a regulator of some kind, or maybe the Attorney General's office. It just really depends on the state, and your lawyer is going to know that and be able to take care of that for you. So, you might not just be able to be, oh, we don't have to tell anybody. You may actually have to tell someone. So just be aware of that. Your vendors, and especially in this space, we're talking with a vendor right now, right? They should have an incident response plan, right? What would they do if they had an incident? Because whether they have your data or access to your domain or those kinds of things, you want to, make sure that they're going to notify you and that they have their ducks in a row. If you've offloaded some kinds of data to them or some, personal information, or it's being hosted by them and it's lost, you're going to need to know that, right? And so that's really important. And then, this is always the toughest question: when do you bring in law enforcement, right? Law enforcement would say every time bring in law enforcement, but this is really a personal, choice of the organization. It can be extremely helpful. Certainly, if the incident that you experienced is one that others have experienced, then the law enforcement might be well aware of, yes, we know exactly who these attackers are and this is what they're doing and those kinds of things. It may be that what happened to you could happen to other people and they can notify other people. So, it's important to give it consideration. I discuss it with your legal team. I know in the political space that this can be a hard choice, right? Around these things. But I really want you to leave you with this thought about incident response. And that is, at the end of the day, like I said, accidents happen. Cyber incidents are happening more frequently. You're likely to be judged more on how you handle the response than an incident took place itself. Hopefully we're moving away from some of the finger wagging and like, oh, they were negligent, they should have done this, they should have done that. We still have that. And, you look at the colonial pipeline and, you're going to get a lot of that. You look at it as, an incident in a big cyber enterprise, you're going to get a lot of finger waggling and, bad you didn't patch that system, those kinds of things, but really, if you think about it and you think back to some of these big data breaches, the criticisms that came to some of them were like how they handled it afterwards, right? How they communicated with the people whose data was lost, how fast they communicated, what kinds of remediation they offered them, how upfront they were about, what took place. If you're at a campaign and you actually did get hacked by a nation state, I think, being able to say that, like, if you can attribute directly to that, might just let people know, yeah, we're on top of this, here's what we've done to address it. This could be a leadership opportunity, right? Like, yeah, we had a cyber incident and we handled it really well, right? And that's how I would handle things if I'm in office, right? You get lemons, you make lemonade, but I mean, really think about that part of it, right? That you are going to be judged, and so be judged well because you did a good job. So, creating a culture of cybersecurity. This is, obviously something you need to do in an organization, and people is what this is about, right? And people are a huge asset for you in cybersecurity, but they also come with risk. So what you want to make sure is that you use the asset part very strongly, which is making sure that they understand what they're supposed to do. We'll talk a little about that more in a second. But first of all, you want to connect cybersecurity to your candidate or organization success. People come to this space to get people elected, to see ideas and policies enacted that they believe in, that they want to prevail. They value what's being done. People are likely or more likely to be interested in protecting things they value, right? They put a lock on their door at home because they don't want people breaking in and violating their house, right? So connect it to your success, right? Make it, part of, like, this is part of what we do. We protect our candidate, we protect our organization, and this protects us all, right? You've got to create expectations and policy and communicate on the issue, right? So you need to tell people what you expect of them, and you need to communicate more regularly on the issue. Something comes out in the news, somebody got hacked. Look, they got hacked. They got their credentials stolen. That's why we use security keys, right? I mean, make the connection to what you're doing about what's going on in the world and remind people. And this isn't every 5 minutes or every day or, but periodically remind people about the importance of cybersecurity and why you do it. You're going to have some kind of training. It doesn't have to be formal. I mean, there's a ton of free training out there. There's computer-based training. There's other things. We provide training. There's all kinds of things. But I mean here is that when someone comes on board into the organization, you have to let them know what they're supposed to do, and you have to make sure they know how to do it, right? So if you're going to tell them, give them a security key and tell them to turn on Google's advanced protection program, you might have to show them how to do that, right? They may not, go back to their desk and be like, well, I don't know how to do that, and they put the key down aside and they never turn it on, right? So, so you're just going to have to provide those kinds of things. And then this part is really essential in many ways. You want to have a non-punitive environment around security generally and reporting. And what I mean by this is, people come into the any space, right? And they're going to do cybersecurity. You're going to have some people who know all about this stuff, right? Like, hey, yeah, I know how to use a key. I use a password manager. This is how I got a 27, character passwords that are randomly generated, whatever, right? And then you're going to have people who are like, no, I don't know anything about this, or I know very little and I don't understand it. And you just don't want to make people, you want to meet them where they're at around this, right? And make sure that you help them move along, right? So no question is too small and no question is stupid. Every question that someone asks about security is good for you, because that means it's on their mind. And if they take those steps to be more secure, then they're making themselves and the organization more secure. So you never want to, look at people, askance when they come and ask about security. And then the reporting is the same. You want really clear delineation. If you, seeing something, here's who you report it to. You email Billy, you call Jane, right? You do whatever. This is exactly how it gets reported, and there's nothing too small, right? If you clicked on a phishing link, a link that you thought was phishing, let us know. We'll look at it. Maybe it wasn't, and then fine. But I'd rather know, I'd rather have a false positive, right, than someone clicking on a link and starting an incident and not thinking like, oh, I don't want to report that because I'm going to get in trouble, with my boss, right? That's the worst thing that can happen, because in a cyber incident, time is your enemy. The longer an incident's going on before you start to address it, the worse the damage is going to be. So you have a highly vested interest in knowing about anything as soon as possible.
I just want to underscore the point you made, Mike, on training and just equipping people, especially in the political space. I personally have ran many a campaign in my life, and the number of volunteers that come in the door who tend to be either older or younger in age and may not have the skill set that you talk about. And when we think about it from a NationBuilder perspective, like, it's a big piece of software, it's a big platform. And so really it is so important. If you can train, if you can spare that hour, that 2.5 hours, maybe once a month to train people, it is going to be invaluable to your campaign, and it's going to increase the speed at which you're able to do things. So please take that away with you on the training aspect for all of the software that you use.
Yeah. Then people will get more out of it too, right? Like the better they teach them the software, the more they understand the features and the functions, the more
exactly
your investment. So that as well. So I talked a little bit. So DDC, let me tell you, I didn't start this in the beginning, and we'll do it now. So we're a nonprofit organization, right? We're actually a C4, but we act like a C3. We have a Federal Election Commission advisory opinion that allows us to give free security products. So we can give away things like security keys, password managers, enhanced website protection, other things, to House candidates that have raised at least 50K, Senate candidates that have raised 100K, or in the case of the general ballot, like post-primary season, if you're on the ballot. So if you're from another party, but you didn't raise that money and you're on the ballot, you're eligible. We don't have to talk about presidentials, hopefully in 2022, please. We can just wait a little bit on that one. You're eligible for this. You can just email us at info@defendcampaigns.org and we will help you get started. We not only have the products, but we have onboarding support as well. So we can, if you get keys from us, we'll help you get those keys working, right? If you take a password manager from us, we'll help you get that password manager implemented. So we're committed to the implementation piece as well, because we know you guys, you don't have security people. You might not even have an IT person on staff, right? I mean, so, security is not good unless you turn it on. So, like I said, just having the key and having it sit by your desk doesn't add any protection at all. So just email us if you think you might be eligible and we'll take it from there. Yeah, so we can skip. This is sort of what I, just talked about. And then there's, one other thing here, and I'd love to take some questions here. We've got some time. So, we created a knowledge base. It's at defendcampaigns.org/resources. This knowledge base is in essence, a help desk for the political sector around cybersecurity. So in this knowledge base, you'll see a lot of things I talked about today. You'll much more, a whole section on how to assess risk in a campaign, those kinds of things, incident response, all those things, encrypted communications. It is also filled with how-tos, right? So how to do certain things. So remember I said that like Cloudflare was free? Well, in the knowledge base, we'll walk you step by step on how to get that free product, like what information you need about your website, in order to fill out the form, and how to find that information on the web about your website if your web was developed a long time ago and you don't know who did that, and you don't have that data, which happens a lot in campaigns, right? Like there's not a lot of shift over from one cycle to the next. How to turn on keys, right? How to select a key, what kind of key is right for you. So there's a lot of information in here about those kinds of things, and we're still building it out all the time. Like right now, I'm actually working on some content around what kinds of administrative functions in workspace, for example, can you have to enforce cybersecurity, like turning on enforcement of certain strength passwords, right? Turning on MFA and making every user have it. There's a lot of stuff built into the services that you're using that have security. Still, even though I talk to the big companies about this all the time, the hassle is you have to turn it on. Like, why just isn't it turned on? I mean, they have obviously, they want to, keep flexibility for their clients and don't want to, force certain kinds of defaults. But anyway, so we're working on those kinds of things as well. But this is really a powerful tool designed for you all. We have just, I think there's over 100 articles in there right now about different kinds of things. And there's some how-to videos that we've made that show you step-by-step those kinds of things. So I encourage you.
I highly recommend it. It's very, very good. Yeah, Michael, I actually have a question for you.
Sure.
And please, folks, pop questions in the chat. User-generated content. And I think about this specifically in the political space. So where they want to have people hosting events or fundraisers on their behalf. And I know it can be a trap in some instances for spam or for bots coming through. And so do you have any recommendations on how to make user-generated content safer for political campaigns?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I mean, clearly you have to know the security of the tools you're using, like Zoom, right? Or those kinds of things, especially if you're holding an event on Zoom, like, how do you set it up so, just like you did in this event today, you let people in, right? Who's coming in, and and in some cases you can let people in one by one, right? So making sure that if people are using those tools on your behalf, that they're aware how to use them safely and securely. In terms of, other kinds of content, I mean, I think there's a couple of things you want to be aware of. One is obviously want to be aware of, people making good content, that's great. So, someone goes out and makes a YouTube, video about your candidate and like, this is why I support Jane, right? Like, that's great. And that's good. But there also might be people who try to become imposters of Jane, right? And say, I'm Jane and I'm running for Congress. This is why you should vote for me. And it's not your Jane and it's not your content. So we didn't cover that in this training, but one of the things that we do talk about, in longer trainings is what we call protecting the periphery, right? Which is really, so you can get your candidate or your candidate's web YouTube channel verified through YouTube, right? So that there won't be imposters. And actually that allows you to do other things like longer videos and maybe broadcasting that kind of stuff as well. You should definitely think about looking at things like Facebook, because Facebook has something called Facebook Protect for the campaign space. And all this, by the way, all this is on the knowledge base. So like, that's the kind of stuff that's in here, like how to get your, YouTube verified. Facebook Protect as well. You have to get your campaign blue check verified there's a process with Facebook when you do that. I probably have to do that if you want to do ads too. So you may have already done it in some cases. Then you sign up for Facebook Protect and they'll pay a little greater attention to your group or to your candidate's page, right? Including like, just more attention to the kinds of, attempts to get on that page or those kinds of things. So it gets a heightened level of security. Same thing with things like Google's Advanced Protection Program, right? When you're in that program, you're getting a higher scrutiny of things that are coming into your mailbox. That's not really user generated. So, I mean, yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think you have to ask your people who are doing that, what are they doing? What tools are they, what sites and things are they using to do those activities?
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Other folks, questions for Michael? Can't believe it. You've explained it so thoroughly, Michael, that no one has a question.
Either that or I put everybody's taking a nap. Those are the two options, right?
I'm gonna go with the top one. I
am too, but I just want to be fair, be honest, right? I hope that people will obviously stay in touch with us. Speaking of training, we do training. We do a longer version of this training with go into a little more depth. We talk a lot more about risk and those things. Our next one is March 31st. And then we do those on a regular basis, but also we haven't officially announced it yet, but I'll let you all know this. We're starting what we're calling a cyber tune-up training in early April. Excuse me. This is going to be a half-hour training with Betty, our director of onboarding and support. They're just going to be basically a series of live demos that show you exactly how to do stuff. So exactly how to turn on MFA and Twitter, exactly like step by step, how to turn on MFA and Facebook, right? How to use some of these browser-based password managers, how to turn on a key in Windows, how to turn on a key in Google Workspace, right? It's like, and if you think it this way, when people come into your campaign, right? People just don't review that stuff very often. Maybe 2 years ago, I turned on MFA on Facebook with some kind of SMS text, which is not the best way to do it. And, I just haven't really reviewed that. So that's why we call it like a tune-up, right? Just come in, get yourself tuned up for cyber and get yourself a little more secure. So we'll be launching that probably in early April. There'll be more to come on that. And you can again, look at the website, or if you want to go on the website and join our mailing list, you're more than welcome to do that, and we'll keep you posted.
That's awesome. And I will be sending out the recording of today's session and also giving y'all the information on how you can contact DDC. We've had a fantastic partnership over the past couple of years, and we'll continue to promote the invaluable content that Michael and his team provide to our customers. And so thank you, Michael, really, truly, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today and taking time out of your day. I'll open the floor again if there are any last burning questions. If not, you can always email me and I will make sure to pass them on to Michael as well. Oh. Okay, well, I will give you all some time back to your day so you can get to your next Zoom on time. And yeah, just again, thank you, Michael, for being here. I really appreciate it. Oh, hold on. Have we got questions? No, just thanks. Just lots of thanks. Brilliant. All right. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.